The Walter Cates Foundation's first virtual gathering is where important conversations are happening. Conversations that will continue to happen both virtually and in person. As the media and entertainment industry's long-standing national diversity advocate, the Walter Cates Foundation has the unique responsibility to understand sociocultural shifts and how they impact our industry. We are thought leaders, decision makers, and innovators. We are proud providers of broadband access across this great nation, connecting people to information, entertainment, and most importantly, to each other. We are creators, creatives, and content providers, delivering epic stories that inspire, evoke emotions, and create change. But even the biggest and brightest of our industry cannot script, greenlight, produce, or edit the events that made 2020 such a pivotal year. The perfect amalgamation of political strife, economic transition, race and gender inequities, coupled with social justice upheaval, served as the genesis for deeper conversations in corporate America, in our homes and on our screens. This time, as difficult as it was necessary. The need to be seen fully was always there, but now the world is paying attention and standing up. Meaningful conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are beginning to gain traction. Many in our industry were already doing the work, in front of and behind the camera and within our companies, to not only bring attention to diversity and inclusion, but to effect real change. Now, we've been propelled to the forefront and are leaning further into the mission of creating a more equitable workplace and working towards a perfect union. Since 2004, the Walter Cates Foundation has distributed over $22 million in targeted grants to support our frontline diversity organizations. And today, we continue to build on our legacy of working to create opportunities that drive equity and inclusion for women, for people of color, for our LGBTQ+ communities, and so much more. We are a resource and thought partner for those companies and organizations eager to become active in creating and driving change. Our media timelines may look a little different than they did last year, but the mission, purpose, and passion remain the same. We continue to engage in transformative work. We have crossed a social and moral threshold. Access, connection, and accountability are at the very epicenter of our purpose. We cannot return to the old norms, but instead must move purposefully and decisively into the future. Change is happening, and we are all a part of that change. Together, we can accelerate into the future, meeting every moment with action and compassion, and making room in our industry for talented people to be seen, to be heard, and to belong. With your support, the Walter Cates Foundation will continue to be there every step of the way, leading our mission. Please welcome Executive Director of the Walter Cates Foundation, Michelle Ray.
Welcome. It's my pleasure to be here with you for this virtual gathering. This setting is a clear shift from our annual fundraising dinner in New York, which has always served as an opportunity for our industry to celebrate and showcase DEI best practices while recognizing our peers. While we can't be together in person, it certainly does not absolve us from our responsibility and commitment to make this industry one in which talented people continue to be provided access to opportunities and to contribute their innovative ideas, their skills, and experiences to the success of our companies, regardless of gender, race, or any aspect of their identity. For over 4 decades, the Walter Cates Foundation has stood as a national advocacy organization, ensuring that DEI remains a priority for our companies and for our industry at large. Our foundation has a long and storied history of work that is steeped in creating impact. What we do, we evaluate and fund programs and initiatives that serve women, minorities, and the LGBTQ+ community. We provide scholarships for the next generation of innovators and thought leaders. We help to sustain internship programs with our partners at the Emma L. Bowen and the T. Howard Foundations. We curate mentorship programs through NAMIC. We fund our industry's biannual diversity survey that effectively measures and reports our industry's progress. And finally, We create a marketplace that connects diverse creatives with development executives at our networks and studios through an established and highly regarded Hollywood Creative Forum. These efforts all remain essential to our work, and they underscore our renewed focus on feeding the pipeline to attract and retain diverse talent across our industry. And while a virus made it necessary for us to wear face masks and an era-defining social justice movement challenged us to remove the blindfolds of indifference and bias, the last 18 months have prompted us to shift our thinking and our behaviors. It has fueled our activism and amplified our collective response to address those who have felt invisible and voiceless, those who deserve to be seen, be heard, and belong. As one of the most impactful and influential industries in the world, our companies have met the moment through their actions and financial support over the past 18 months. In fact, companies like Comcast have pledged $1 billion to close the digital gap to help reach an additional 50 million low-income Americans. And they recently announced a second round of grants from the Comcast Rise Investment Fund, providing an additional $6 million to hundreds of small businesses owned by people of color. We'll hear a little bit more later from a Rise grant recipient. Now, Cox Enterprises established a $1 million fund which was distributed to civil and human rights organizations all across the country. And they committed an additional $1 million in advertising time to the Ad Council's racial equity campaign, Love Has No Labels. Charter Spectrum increased their efforts to support veterans, expanded their reach to diverse suppliers, and committed to increasing connectivity to rural America. Our content providers have also responded to the call for change. Discovery Communications increased their support of a 2-year social justice project called Making an Exoneree, while others like Disney teamed up with the United Negro College Fund to create the 2021 Disney UNCF Corporate Scholars Program, contributing $1 million over 3 years to finance scholarships and paid internships at the Walt Disney Company. Viacom-CBS partnered with the NAACP on a multi-year agreement to produce content for networks and streaming platforms, while their partners MTV Networks committed $250 million over 3 years to support BIPOC and women filmmakers. Warner Media, along with AT&T, contributed $7 million to a social media campaign in support of its Twitter hashtag #StopAsianHate. HSN and QVC introduced women and minority-owned brands to their audiences, while others at ATN, AMC Networks, TV One, GCI, Revolt, all launched programs and partnerships to become even more inclusive. But yet still our work is not done. That's why at the Walter Cates Foundation, we continue to play a pivotal role in driving our collective commitment to ensure that our industry remains constant in its focus on DEI. We have convened this virtual event to ensure that we continue to raise critical funds that support our work that is both purposeful and directive. Your financial support allows us to focus on lifting the people who bring innovation, leadership, and talent to this vibrant industry. And your sponsorship and support make our work possible. Finally, I want to thank our sponsors and donors without whom we could not continue our important work. And if you have not already done so, please contribute to our annual fundraising drive today. To donate, you can visit us at waltercates.org. And please give generously. And now, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Michael K. Powell. Michael is the former chairman of the Federal Communications Commission and the current president and CEO of NCTA, the Internet and Television Association. While Michael's resume is impressive, what has always struck a chord with me is his keen ability to communicate and to deliver inspirational messages with resonance. I'm so proud and honored to have Michael in my orbit as a leader, a boss, a champion, and a mentor. So please welcome Michael K. Powell.
Hello. It is unfortunate that the pandemic has kept us physically apart for a second year. I would much prefer to be surrounded by the lights of Times Square, the sound of music, the smell of a nice dinner, and the warmth of conversation with each of you. We miss the Kate's dinner. Nonetheless, I'm grateful and proud of our industry because it is by their hand that the infrastructure exists to gather virtually. And that is important because the work of diversity and inclusion has only intensified during this strange and challenging period. COVID is a strange serpent. It is not a living thing, but it reproduces. It has no soul or conscience. It has no political affiliation, nor any race or ethnicity. It does not discriminate in its relentless pursuit to propagate itself in the soul of our bodies. Yet COVID does not strike randomly with equal chance. It most easily attacks those who are unprotected. Being without a vaccine is like confronting a dangerous hurricane, a raging wildfire, or a blinding blizzard out in the open without shelter or protection. Because I want all of you to live, I strongly encourage everyone to get vaccinated so we can enjoy you and your talents for years to come. But COVID also strikes Blacks and Hispanics with particular venom. This disparity illuminates the persistent inequalities of American life. It strikes disproportionately, not because of biological or genetic susceptibility, but because of the enduring consequences of poverty and the systematic racial disparities in housing and healthcare. Poor or immigrant families living in cramped quarters cannot socially distance or quarantine at home. People of color are more likely to hold jobs that do not afford the luxury of remote work. And the inequality in the healthcare system and access to it increases the likelihood of serious illness and death. The pandemic slashed U.S. life expectancy by more than 9 million years, with Black and Hispanic Americans losing more than twice as many years compared to white Americans. Black and brown people are also less likely to get vaccinated. Many still harbor the fears of being experimented on or probed to prove genetic inferiority of the race. While understandable, the greatest social justice act we can take is to convince more in our community to overcome these fears and protect themselves and their families. You know, the Black Lives Matter movement helped raise our collective consciousness about these kinds of systemic racial disparities. More corporations and businesses than ever have moved beyond lip service about diversity and have dedicated themselves more deeply to this unfinished work. Yet one feels the backlash, both in advancing racial progress and trying to end the pandemic. Police who feel unjustifiably targeted when they see protests against bad cops. Mask mandates being resisted as an intrusion on individual liberty. White Americans who protest that the goal of racial equality efforts is to replace them in society. Vaccines intended to save lives are controversial, with support breaking down into silos of red and blue. Liberals who deplatform speech or cancel people they don't like. It feels as if we are entangled in a floating trash net of zero-sum beliefs that restrict us from making our way to a better society. We all need to take a breath and recognize the mutuality of our destiny. We will never advance in meeting our challenges if I hold to the belief that my progress must come at your expense. It is hard to hope for better days when every action is met with a hyperbolic, fearful reaction. This division is toxic to our moral values and is literally lethal when it comes to COVID. As the pandemic is proving with ruthless efficiency, we humans are unbreakably interdependent. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. was sentenced to time in a Birmingham, Alabama jail for participating in nonviolent civil rights demonstrations. From the confines of his cell, he wrote this: "In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All persons are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality." These words express a universal truth about the human species and its effort at progress. Our well-being is inextricably intertwined. We cannot expect to improve our lives if we don't improve the lives of others too. This truth is supreme, whether trying to break the sickle of sickness and death plowing through our society, or trying to tamp down and ultimately bury the rot of systematic racism. So those words bear final repeating. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. Wise words to live by. Thank you.
The Walter Cates Foundation would like to recognize and thank NCTA's President and CEO, Michael Powell, and our Board of Directors, including our Board Chair, Dave Watson, of Comcast for their leadership and unwavering support of the Foundation. Now, a message from today's presenting sponsor, Charter Communications. Please welcome Rhonda Critchlow, SVP and Chief Diversity Officer at Charter Communications.
Hello, I'm Rhonda Critchlow, Chief Diversity Officer at Charter Communications, a leading broadband connectivity company known through our Spectrum brand. It's wonderful to be here with you today in support of the Walter Cates Foundation. Charter is proud to be the presenting sponsor of the Cates Foundation's virtual gathering, Be Seen, Be Heard, Belong. Those short words convey a big idea: that the cable media and entertainment industry has a leading role to play in the movement for inclusion, representation, and social justice. Partnering with the Walter Cates Foundation, given its vision and funding of topical and timely programs, continues to help our industry advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is especially valuable to us at Charter as we strive to integrate diversity and inclusion into everything we do, from our people and our culture of inclusion, to the products and services we offer our diverse customer base, to the way in which we strengthen the communities where our employees live and work. The Walter Cates Foundation is a vital player in empowering people of all backgrounds in our industry. Its Hollywood Creative Forum earlier this year, which Charter proudly sponsored, connected diverse content creators with studio development executives. Its Courageous Conversations series brought rich, insightful discussions to the media and entertainment industry. And its partnerships with important organizations such as Common Sense Leadership, NAMIC, WICT, and the T. Howard and Emma Bowen Foundations have given us valuable research and provided critical training and scholarships to close gaps for people of color and women in our industry. To those who have contributed to the Walter Cates Foundation in the past, thank you. With your support, the Cates Foundation can leverage this historic moment in time to make transformative strides in helping our industry become one where everyone is seen, heard, and belongs. I hope that you enjoyed today's event. Thank you for participating.
The Walter Cates Foundation is pleased to share the following message from Mala Szechuan Bistro, a Comcast Rise Investment Fund grant recipient.
Hi, my name is Corey. I am the owner of Mala Szechuan Bistro, and I am proud to be a Comcast Rise Investment Fund recipient. I opened Mala Szechuan Bistro 10 years ago after graduating college with the intention of bringing real, authentic Sichuan cuisine to the city of Houston and introduce what mala is to the city This combination of spiciness and the numbing sensation from the Sichuan peppercorns. It makes me the happiest to see people from all kinds of cultural background coming together to try our food and to enjoy our food, and because of us, learn about what Sichuan cuisine is. This is our 4th location that we just opened at the end of last year, which is in the middle of the pandemic. When I heard that I'm receiving the Comcast Rise grant, I was running around at my restaurant doing day in and day out operations, and my husband told me that we got the grant, and I was ecstatic. The grant has definitely helped us through the hardship. It helped us pay for a lot of the extra expenses associated with the pandemic, and also used it for extra publicity, marketing, and to support first responders and medical workers. For other businesses that are still struggling financially because of the pandemic, I really encourage them to apply for the Comcast Rise Investment Fund as well. The award can really help them to turn around and stay afloat, and in turn help other businesses too. I'm glad that I'm qualified for the Comcast Rise grant because it gives me a better peace of mind for running my business.
The Walter Cates Foundation is pleased to present From Transaction to Transformation, a conversation with Ellen McGirt, Senior Editor, Fortune Magazine, and Daisy Auger Dominguez, Chief People Officer, Vice Media.
Oh, good afternoon. It is such a joy to be here with all of you. I can't see you, but I can feel you. I can feel the transformation happening around us, and I couldn't be more happy to be talking with one of my dearest friends and sisters in the work. And I want to introduce her in just a second. But again, I want to say thank you to everyone from the Walter Cates Foundation and all of the people who are assembled here, because I know how you have summoned me, and I know you're serious about changing the world, each and every one of you. So thank you. So Daisy, I got to know you about 5 years ago when I was starting on my own official inclusion journey, when I launched Race Ahead, then a daily newsletter on race and culture at Fortune, of all places, which has been a transformational journey for me. But I think you were with Comcast back then, if I remember. But yeah, oh, yes. And I want you to bring us up to speed on the work you've been doing. But here's my introduction to you, and here's how I talk about you in the world. Several people, I want to say 5 people, said, "Oh, you care about inclusion, you care about corporate life, you care about changing the world. You need to know Daisy." And I called you right away, and they were right. I'm so glad you're here with me. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and a little bit about your journey to your current position.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ellen. And what you forgot to say was that once I was introduced to your newsletter, I was instantly hooked. And my biggest source of pride was to make sure everyone at Google and everyone I knew had access to it. I think I to this day, I share it as the definitive guide for anyone who wants to just stay abreast of this work in a really thoughtful and human centered way. So thank you for the amazing work that you do. Well, I am currently the Chief People Officer at Vice Media Group. I have been here for a year and about a year and a half now. And that means that I lead all of our people, culture, and social impact strategies globally for the organization. And because my work has always centered on diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's what we do at Vice. We do not have a separate standalone practice. We integrate it into everything that we do, which has always been my dream. And prior to Vice, I actually had a consultancy. Immediately after that, I worked at Viacom. Prior to that, I was at Google. Prior to that, I was at Disney. Prior to that, I was at Time Warner. And prior to that, I was where I started my career as a credit risk analyst at Moody's Investor Service, where I eventually transitioned into a few roles in corporate foundations, and the role that led me to where I am right now, which was the first head of diversity and inclusion for Moody's.
So, wow, that's incredible. really, I mean, I hope you're taking good notes because you've got a book in you. I know that you already know this. I want to ask about the moment in time that we're in, 390 something days after the murder of George Floyd. And I want to ask a
Mhm.
question about industry in general and our industry in particular. Uh, at this stage, we are a little over a year after the racial reckoning that nobody saw coming. It was 211 degrees, and suddenly it was boiling and boiling and boiling. And the necessity of very senior leaders from a variety of industries to stand up and say, okay, this time it's going to be different. I'm going to do some things. And I wanted to ask you where you thought we are in that work, in this racial reckoning, and if it is real, what looks like reality to you, what looks like urgency and seriousness to you, and if not, what needs to happen. First in business in general, and then in the industry that we're talking about today.
It's interesting. It's hard to answer that question in a simple way. I think that despite a very real and growing commitment to racial equity across every industry, the fact of the matter is that the experiences of BIPOC employees and women of color in particular just have not improved year over year. Now, I wasn't expecting things to improve dramatically over 12 months because we know that this work takes time. But it is a bit disappointing, and particularly for me when I speak to mentees of mine who have entered into D&I roles, particularly in the last year, because as you know very well, it became a mad rush to hire diversity folks, and
Yeah.
everybody was creating diversity and inclusion roles. But as with many things, it was just so deeply reactive that organizations didn't really spend time understanding the root causes of what had even brought them to where they were. And that is one of the biggest challenges for organizations, and that we go into solving mode right away versus really taking the time to be introspective and reflective, and then to create the right conditions for the folks that we're bringing on board to do what we ask them to do. And what I'm hearing from a lot of recent D&I colleagues, and even some who have recently stepped away from the roles that they just took on about a year ago, was precisely that. They brought me in to drive change, but they weren't ready to drive change. I think the intent is there. I think that it's not for this. This isn't a nefarious, effort on behalf of organizations to not make
Right.
progress. I do
Right.
fundamentally believe that, but I just don't
Right.
believe that they're willing to do what it takes.
See, we should dig into that because what does ready really look like? What does willing really look like? I reviewed some data recently. Actually, I'll send it along to everyone from a global firm called DDI who had interviewed a big number of CEOs, 3,800 ish, across a bunch of industries, who self rated their own leadership capacity coming out of COVID,
Mhm.
out of all of this drama. And to a remarkable degree, they rated themselves lower in certain key areas. One was empathy, ability to feel, express, operationalize empathy, to be able to express the company's values and to create a culture of inclusion. And I thought that's good news because if you know that you don't know, that you know that you have a deficit, that you can work on it. And I'm curious if you feel that now that we know that there are people who are not ready, in your words, who that you're seeing organizations who are not yet ready to do the work, that this is a moment that we can build on.
I fundamentally believe that we can build on this, and my teams hear me say this all the time. It's small, consistent, deliberate, and sustainable actions made over time are what's going to deliver the greatest impact. But we have to
Mhm.
stick with it. And what we know often is that we build the best plans and then we stop. And
Right.
either things feel less urgent, they feel less necessary.
Right.
We go through what we're going through right now, which are significant financial challenges for a lot of organizations, and so something has to go, and this goes. And I have seen this cycle, as I know you have, Ellen, over and over again. We stop, and then 6 months, 12 months, a year and a half, another crisis happens, and then we have to bring back that old playbook and start all over again.
Yep.
And we lose traction, And we don't only lose traction, because I wanna honor the point that you made around empathy. We lose credibility and trust in the people that we want to bring along for this work. Not just those that are the most vulnerable and impacted by this work, but even the same leaders that we say should be leading this work, they become doubtful of whether this is even possible. And so they stand back and say, well, this isn't going to happen. So why should I invest my time and energy in this?
Yeah, you're describing a really sad and vicious cycle that ends up bringing us back full circle to keep having the same conversation about the talent pipeline over and over and over again. And I just talked to columnist Charles Blow at another conference today, and I raised a similar issue with him. And he said that the big problem was ally fatigue. You know, that you've got people who are dominant cultures who are there to remove the barriers, and suddenly it gets hard. And then they get tired. And this happens throughout business history, particularly when things are difficult. And one of the reasons why it gets hard is because it's actually more emotional work than people think it's going to be. This is not a training issue. This is not a bias mitigation issue. This is a human issue that has moral implications that happen for things that happen inside in our walls, in our history, and in government, and how we choose to engage with each other in the civic sphere. So I know that to answer this question would get you a Nobel Prize. I understand the enormity of the issues that we're talking about, but from a day-to-day interaction point of view, how have you learned for dominant culture people? And in the US, I'm talking about white majority culture folks. It's different in other parts of the world, but here, to become more comfortable, to become more resilient in the face of a problem that doesn't have an easy solution?
You know, we've got to hold hands, Ellen. I say this to my team all the time. This is not just your job. This is certainly not just my job. It's we've got to do this work together and lift each other up when one of us is faltering. I often talk about my early experience at Vice, because I joined Vice on May 15th, 2020. And George Floyd was murdered 2 weeks later.
Oh my
And
God.
yes, the entire world, as you know, as you've documented and others, all of a sudden, became aware of what many had lived and experienced and worked on for so many years. And it was as if all of a sudden every plate was spinning, and I needed to draw on my own confidence and my own resolve and hold space for the BIPOC employees who were hurting, the BIPOC employees who were coming into our video meetings every day and trying to grapple with what was happening in the world. Also, because I work for a media and entertainment company, the BIPOC employees who were out there doing the work of journalism and doing the work of covering the stories that were so close and painful to them, and the work of our editorial teams who were writing about this. And so it was holding space for all of them, and then holding space for our leaders. And what I did with our leaders and managers, because that's what we really doubled down on, that was, just I encouraged them and sometimes even begged them. I was like, you need to pause before jumping to action. You need to really spend time thinking about, what is it that you're trying to solve for? What feelings does this evoke in you? What is your responsibility here? You need to listen to what your team members need, not what you think they need, not what you're reading that people are telling you they need, what your team members, every single one of them, all of their experiences, what they need. And then you need to show evidence of care, even if you do not know what to say. And what I meant by that was that everybody wanted to jump into action and write all sorts of, letters and whatnot. And I would say sometimes all you need to know, or all you need to, what your team members, all they need to know is that you care. And just being humble and vulnerable and authentic enough to say, I don't understand what you're experiencing right now, but I know this is not fair. This is not right. And I want to do what I can do to create a better condition for you. And but that means I have to do my own work. It's not on you, it's on me. And that again, to your point earlier, it's like that doesn't happen overnight. That, that takes time and effort. It takes having partners that are willing to engage you in that vulnerable path. But it takes every single one of us to acknowledge that we don't only we're not only responsible for being allies and being supporters and champions and being in this work with each other, but that means that also when we're uncomfortable, when we get tired, we have to acknowledge that, create the space that we need to replenish, and then we have to keep on going because we can't afford to stop this.
That was a really deceptively simple and powerful tip to creating a listening and empathetic culture. I mean, that was a masterclass right there. I just wanted to pause and acknowledge that. And I want to build on it because I know that you and I have talked about this before. I was committed when it became clear that the race beat at Fortune was going to stick, that I wanted to be dedicated to the notion of the talent pipeline from birth to C-suite. That and figuring out the ways and the places where we lose people along the way, which is going to be different and intersectional depending on who you are, and focus on those tender moments and the solutions around them. And I find that has been a less emotional framing, but it adds to the same. I don't know what to say to you today in this moment in the workplace. But now I'm also, as an executive or as a person who greenlights stories or as a person who is in charge of media, I'm now in a position to think about where the people in your life that you are worried about, that you're worried about your teenage son who might be pulled over by the police, that you're worried about your mother who's in a service position, who's never going to break the cycle of poverty. You're worried about your cousin who doesn't have access to good health care at a time of COVID. You're worried about your cousin who's pregnant, and we know the maternal mortality rates. Like suddenly you realize where people are vulnerable and where people are lost to their fullest potential. And as executives in this industry in particular, we have a role to play in telling those stories. Can you talk a little bit about what it's going to take to bring some of these issues to the public consciousness?
To bring these issues, we each have to figure out what's our role. And this is what I often tell. We each have different roles to play. And the great part of it is that we can choose what roles we want to play. What this doesn't absolve you from is not choosing a role and not doing anything. But you can choose the role that you want to play as an advocate, as a champion, as an ally, as a conspirator in this work. Everybody's got a role to play. And I do often use this very simple method around, reflection, visioning, action, and persistence, because I do believe that these are the steps, and it's been well researched. These are the steps that we all have to go through on our own. But again, the point is, these are not times to step back and say, I'm going to let someone else figure this out. This is the time for each and every one of us to figure out, how do we solve this collectively? And to your point, this last year and a half, we have all reoriented our lives so dramatically, right? And you're seeing it in the decisions that employees make, right? Everyone's calling this a workforce right now. The turnover tsunami, the great resignation. When everybody comes to me to tell, everyone's trying to figure out what are the solutions to address this. I said, you've got to think of this in two ways. One is, we've reoriented our lives. Everybody wants something different right now. And they realize that life can be different at work, right? For a long time, we've wanted it to be different, but we just could not see our way through it. In the last year and a half, we've seen things can be different, and they must be different in order to protect me, my loved ones, my community. The second piece of it is that everyone's trying to find these transformational initiatives that are sort of out of the box and out there. And I kind of just, it's kind of like how I talk to my 13-year-old. Like, let me make this simple for you. Great managers have always existed, and they've always known what to do to bring out the best in their people, right? And that means that they've listened to their teams, that they've sought to reduce obstacles for their success, that they actually ask better questions, that instead of saying, well, how can we make this a more diverse and equitable environment? They actually ask you, hey, Ellen, what's getting in your way? And better yet, how can I help reduce the obstacles that are getting in your way? Because
Right.
good managers know that teams move faster when their paths are clear ahead of them. And what companies have done very poorly is reduce obstacles for historically excluded groups. And so, if you as a manager want to bring out the humanity in your teams and improve performance, you don't have to come up with these convoluted strategies. You simply have to understand who your people are, envision what kind of leader and manager you want to be, right? This doesn't have to be something that comes all the way from the top in your organization. You have control over the people you manage, over the people you engage with. And then you've got to, once you've done that listening and that reflection, okay, let's try a few things. Let me try a few new practices. Let me go out to lunch with different people. Let me share my story, my real authentic story of what it was like to go through the pandemic, of what it is still like. I tell my team, I write to my team a weekly, my little version, not as intense as yours, but I do a little version of a weekly newsletter for my team. And it is every Sunday afternoon and evening. It's just my favorite ritual. And I write to them a little bit about what's happening in my life. And this week's was about helping working with my daughter on her high school applications, because my family is now going through the high school application process in New York City, which I don't wish for anybody. And and I talk about how I like simple. And so I'm trying to help my daughter simplify the process, how crazy this process is, and how, we'll see me on the other side of this. And then I went on to talk about our strategic planning as a team and where I see some of our gaps from an inclusion and belonging perspective. And then I shared with them a heads up of this week we're announcing our return to offices, and this is what it looks like. And here's how we're framing it. And I give that context to my team. And everyone on my team receives this weekly, from the most junior talent on my team to the most executive, direct reports to me, and globally. So what do I achieve with that? Vulnerability with my team. They get to see who I am as a mother, as a wife, as a human, as a Latinx woman. I talk about my challenges and and my experiences during Hispanic Heritage Month, where I joke that Hispanic Heritage Month is where I'm super Latina. Everybody wants to talk to me during this month. Nobody cares during the rest of the year. But I share that with them so that they understand that I, like them, I'm living. I'm trying to make these solutions. And then I encourage and engage them in the process of decision making for us as a team, so that they know what's coming down the pike and what I'm thinking. So they don't have to be wondering, what is Daisy thinking about this? And then I use those letters to reinforce our values and the behavioral expectations that, that we have for our teams. I remind my team all the time, we are people, culture, and impact. If we can't partner well with each other, if we can't see humanity in each other, we don't have a chance with doing that in the organization. So here's a few things that I've learned in the last week. I just shared a lot of different examples, but I share because I do also believe that as managers and leaders, we have to model this behavior. And that's how I model it for my team.
I was taking notes, as you know, because I'm a person who takes notes. And again, another masterclass here. But what I'm hearing you saying is that the inclusive leaders, people who really understand all of this, the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging piece, provide context. They provide a culture where lifelong learning of the human side of the leadership practice is valued, and they offer courage. And I think vulnerability is a courageous act. To actually be human at work is a courageous act. But you are saying that it is an essential leadership skill at a time when we're really wrestling with who we are as a society and who we want to be within the workforce and the moral implications of diversity. So we only have a couple of minutes left, and I hate to let you go, but I was hoping you could share some advice for the senior leaders who are listening, particularly now, who are in such an unusual position to take public, and including within your team feels public stances on issues that may feel frightening or unfamiliar to them, even if it means revealing something about themselves. It's a naked place to be, because I think you're right. I think this is what is called for now as we try to transform the workforce into something that is equitable and compassionate and empathetic. that ripples out into our communities. What do you say to senior leaders who are afraid to do this?
Well, this is what my teams hear from me all the time. You have to do it. You have to step into your own discomfort, be willing to experience discomfort and sit in it so that you can understand why it makes you uncomfortable. It also means that you have to show up in communities that are not like yours with respect and with a willingness to learn, rather than showing up thinking that you're there to save people or fix things, which is what managers and leaders are often inclined to do. I'm here to fix things. It's like, no one's asking you to fix anything right now. What we're just asking you is to enter our space and to see us, to value us, to recognize us, to understand what our truth is. And sometimes the best way to understand someone else's truth is to just sit there and to share and to be willing to share your own truth. I do biweekly check-ins with my HR leadership team as a team, and we do separate reflection questions every time we meet. We spend the first 15 minutes with reflection questions, and sometimes the one question I will ask is, "What's your truth today? Where are you?" And I always start with me. Here's where I am. And some weeks I'm exhausted, some weeks I'm challenged, some weeks I'm energized. But in order to show up for my team, I have to model what that looks like, and I have to create that space of vulnerability for me. And the last thing I'll tell leaders is, I have been vulnerable for quite some time doing this work. I have never been let down. I have never been let down. My vulnerability does not diminish my ability to lead. It enhances it. And I fundamentally believe that 21st century leaders, these are the skills that we have not been taught, but it's no longer a separate yourself as much as you can from your teams. It's a build as much proximity as you can with them. And they will go to bat for you if you do that.
I will go to bat for you any day of the week. And I promise to call you when it's not Hispanic Heritage Month. If you promise to call me when it's not African American History Month, and I know you always do. Lisa, you know I love you. I get a chance to say it in public. I should also say I love every single person who's listening here and all the incredible people who put together Diversity Week. It is such an important thing. And please invite us back. And maybe next year we'll all be dancing at the gala. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yes.
Thank you so very much. Congratulations to everyone. And thank you for your part in doing this important work.
I want to emphasize our message. Everyone deserves to be seen, be heard, and belong. Change is happening, and the Walter Cates Foundation has been there every step of the way. Your support enables us to move purposefully and decisively into the future. So please contribute today. Thank you.
We would like to thank all our sponsors and allies for supporting our important work. Your generosity and contributions make a lasting impact on our industry's efforts to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion.